From last meeting, did everybody have a chance to read them?
Yeah.
Yes.
Any
Yes.
questions or problems with them at all?
No.
Any motion to approve them somewhere?
Motion to approve the meeting minutes is published.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Second matter of the meeting is an election of officers, as Gary, after so many years, is not with us anymore, moved to the Midwest. I have opened the nominations for chairman.
And I'd like to nominate Jim Gedney as chairman.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Thank you, I guess.
And then for secretary.
Nominations for secretary?
Howard Hall, I nominate.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Congratulations. Third order of business is the Compost residential subdivision. A little bit different than we normally do. This is a conservation subdivision, which is bigger than our usual project. And in order to begin this, I suspect we should have a proposal of some sort. Is that true? Is there a presentation you want to make?
I feel like I have abandonment issues. Good evening, Lynn Small, Northeast Engineers, 6 Valley Road. The project before you is a 5-lot subdivision. We've been asked to include a conservation subdivision layout plan, but the owners are hoping to get larger lots, so the proposals that they're asking for approval from the planning board would be the one that you see on the first sheet, which is a 5-lot conventional subdivision. To minimize, we do have the Madeford River, which is on the east side of the site, and then the associated wetlands to that. So there won't be any development proposed on that very end of the site. But it is downhill, so that's where our drainage features will end up being. We're at master plan level right now, so everything's kind of conceptual. There's no real engineering for the project done yet. However, we did try to create a subdivision that had less impervious area than you might normally get. So that's how we have, as you see, there's two, it looks like there's 2 cul-de-sacs, one earlier and then one further down. The town's zoning ordinance requires that we have a certain amount of frontage per lot for it to be considered a legal lot with frontage. But in order to provide access to the property, you really only need the road to go so far. So what we've done to minimize the impervious area is to shorten up the road and create a cul-de-sac at the end so that it's just long enough so that each home can have their own driveway. But then it results in a reduction in your impervious area. The right-of-way, however, has to extend further in so that we can provide the legal frontage for the 5 lots. It'll feel like the road is shorter. When everything's constructed, it's going to end at that cul-de-sac. We do have a sidewalk shown on one side. They do plan on putting street trees in. We do have municipal sewer here, so we'll be connecting in. There is an existing sewer line for the previous subdivision of this lot, but it's not in the right place to gravity connect everybody into it, so we'll be moving it and abandoning, or removing, whatever Tom wants us to do, that constructed sewer line. We've also met with the water department, the Department of Public Utilities in Newport. It's Newport Water is open to doing a water main extension for this project, so the owners are looking into that. We provided them some estimated costs because it's obviously more expensive to bring in municipal water than to have individual wells, and they're looking at that option right now. If they do bring in water, they'll probably bring in gas. Both water and gas are available at is at Compton View, which is at the end of Serenity. So it's not a long run, but it is a bit, it's not right at the edge of the property, so they have to come down the existing portion of Serenity with basically no benefit. So they're weighing that cost benefit, and we'll know before the planning board, and it'll be incorporated in the preliminary plan set that we develop once we do all the engineering for the site. We have no variances that we're asking for. We are asking for a waiver to shorten the road and make it less wide, because it's not gonna be ever extended upon. We have wetlands on one side, and the residents don't want to loop through to the Madeford River Road. They like to keep that short. There's only like 2 or 3 houses on that roadway. So that's basically it in a nutshell. We haven't done the drainage, like I said, yet, but we did reserve some places for the drainage to be incorporated in. And they'd be on those back 2 lots that are closest to the wetland. That's the lowest point of the site.
Is that lot 2 and 3, or 3 and 4?
It's 3 and 4. It should be shown on the plan that is in your set. All right, sheet.
Could you explain briefly the difference between a conservation subdivision and a non-conservation subdivision, what you'd have to change?
Sure. A conservation subdivision is, I guess they just changed the ordinance recently, and any lot that's over 3 acres is subject to demonstrating a conservation subdivision. You basically get the same amount of lots as you would on a yield plan, like your maximum yield plan. This lot actually supports 7 residential lots. The owners don't want to make the lots that small. They want a bigger, lesser, bigger lots. So we did a 5-lot subdivision. But in your packet, you'll see a 7-lot conservation subdivision. That's maximum yield. You'll also see a conventional 7-lot. So we had to do a lot of stuff that we're not going to use. But the conservation subdivision regulations basically take the zoning district that you're in and has a set open space requirement, but then the lots can be smaller. So if you're in, say, and I don't know if my numbers are accurate, but if you're in R40, instead of having a 40,000 square foot lot with so much frontage, you're allowed to have a smaller lot with less frontage and less land area, maybe 20,000 square feet. It depends on if you have sewer and water available. The sizes change. But you're allowed to have a smaller lot with less frontage, but then you're required to have a certain percentage of the overall project be open space. Now that open space is accessible by all of the people in the subdivision. And they could use it and put like playground or tennis court or meadow or whatever.
A lot of places require 2 different ways of access to a area for fire and something else in case one side is blocked. You knocked out that Madeford River Road extension for suitability for setting up your lots. Is there any consideration because of safety reasons or police reasons to have 2 ways of access?
So we did meet with the fire department and they have signed off on the accessibility of the site. I know that the residents on Madeford River Road did not want a through street. So that was incorporated into the design. It wasn't really in line with what the owners wanted to do out here either. They wanted it to be more of a family compound type subdivision. So that's how we ended up where we are. I have not heard that there's any issues with egress or with the site. Like I said, we did meet with the fire department. That was like technical review committee. They were part of that, so they commented on that.
On one of the plans, you have a water quality device as well as a stormwater detention device. Other plans, you have only the stormwater retention device. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I just gotta grab my plans. So the drainage system hasn't been designed yet, but we do incorporate approximate areas that we suspect we'll need for drainage so that the board has an idea on where we're going, because master plan is when you go through and show them your conceptual ideas and get input from all of the different town parties. But you are going to be required to provide water quality treatment and detention for this site.
No matter what.
No matter what. So sometimes what we can do is provide individual water quality treatment systems for the impervious area associated with the lot, and then keep the main drainage system just for the roadway. Either that, or we'll put a limitation on the amount of impervious area each lot can have and design the drainage system for the overall project based on those numbers. But we haven't really gotten there yet.
Because on your 7-lot plan, you have no water treatment.
Oh, yeah, well, we were,
And on the 5-lot plan, you do. I was just wondering why.
yeah, no, we would have one. We would have to have one when we did the full design
So
work.
it's
We were just really just tagging that area as where we
So
would
it's a
put the
preliminary
drainage.
picture.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
conceptual, it's master plan level, which is less than preliminary even.
Is the area, the closeness of this development to the Meadford River Road similar to the development just south of that on the Meadford River Road, Farm Lane, or whatever it's called? There's one just south of that, off Meadford River Road that goes down towards Meadford River Road.
Oh, I'm not familiar with
Familiar
that. No, I don't know that one.
Looks like a similar sort of thing. It's a higher density, it's an R30 area, but it goes right down next to the river. That's funny.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with that.
Okay.
I have a question for somebody, and I'm not sure who it's to. I don't know if it's for Peter or somebody else, but as the Conservation Commission, is part of our job here tonight to make our observations and recommendations relating to the 5-lot option versus the 7-lot options? Or it sounds like the main emphasis of the builder is on the 5-lot option, but are
Well,
we?
that is something that, and it's sort of a mixed bag, you know, the Conservation Commission, your role is typically looking at things like drainage, like impacts on the Meadford River, those sorts of things, which unfortunately at the master plan stage, since most of the engineering is done at the preliminary stage, we don't really have a lot of that information right now. So, I mean, to the extent that you believe that 5 houses would be more beneficial from a drainage or conservation standpoint than perhaps a 7-house option, that's something you would weigh in on. Certainly, that's also something that the planning board is going to take a look at, and the planning board ultimately make the determination. We prefer, you know, a conventional plan versus a conservation plan. There were some questions about the traffic circulation. That's really more of a planning board issue. But to the extent that, you know, less roadway means less drainage issues, that's also something that the Conservation Commission might also want to consider. So the short answer is, to the extent that you think it impacts the drainage and conservation values, then that's something that you would want to take a look at and comment on.
Yeah, I do have, myself, I have definite opinions about the 5-lot option versus the 7-lot options. It seemed like the conservation plan options both have the 7-house lots, and it seems like the town is promoting a conservation option approach, but in this particular case here, the conservation option approach may not be the better one for the town in terms of environmental factors and wetland factors. So I'm assuming that we should comment on that.
I think certainly to the extent that you think it impacts those drainage and environmental factors, then I think you should. And just by the way, so the ordinance was recently, as Lynn mentioned, was amended. Up until recently, conservation development was sort of the default option, and then you had to, I guess, sort of convince the board that the conventional plan was better. Now there's a little bit more flexibility built into it, and applicants are required to present both a conservation and a conventional plan, and ultimately it's really up to the planning board to make a determination based on what's been presented, which one they prefer.
Another question I had, which is possibly rhetorical, I'm not sure, but I noticed in the conservation plan descriptions, they identify a maximum number of houses for a developed subdivision. And I noticed that the two 7-lot drawings, I think, address the maximum that would be allowed, they could fit in here on a conservation development option. But the documentation talks about the maximum allowed, and that's what the designs are developed to. But do you have to go to the maximum to be a conservation development?
No, I think that the idea is if I'm gonna present a plan saying I want to develop a conservation development with 6 lots, I need to be able to show that I could do a 6-lot conventional development. Because if I do a conservation development, I don't get an additional bonus of extra lots. So that's one of the reasons you get to present both a conventional and they usually present a max plan on a conventional basis to show that, that you could get the same number of lots conventionally as you could with the conservation plan.
Because I was thinking this 5-lot option probably does fit the conservation objective descriptions, but it's just not labeled as a conservation option.
We have the 5-lot option as a conventional subdivision, right? That's true.
So by going to the conservation, as you, correct me if I'm misinterpreting what you said earlier, you're allowed to go to a smaller lot size, which allows you to put a higher density of homes for the same given
You're
development.
allowed, you don't get more density, I think the intent behind it is that if your lots are smaller, then your infrastructure is smaller. So your roadway is smaller, your drainage is smaller, your water main is smaller.
Right.
We tried to address that by making the roadway a little bit unique, where you have some driveways coming off the end with the 5-lot subdivision, because they are losing that density by going with less lots, but they didn't want to over subdivide the property.
So at the big picture level, you could fit 7 R40 lots on this plot.
Yes, that's the plan that's
Right.
up. Oh, two,
No, that's
three, four.
sheet 10.
Yeah,
So you can fit 7.
yes,
So you're presenting a 5-lot conventional, there's a 7-lot conventional, and then a 7-lot conservation.
right.
Those are the 3 big picture
Ones
options,
that we put
right?
together, right?
And the developer, and at least at this early stage, would prefer to do a 5-lot conventional,
Yes,
ideally.
with waivers from building the roadway the full length and shortening it and having a driveway.
And I
at
guess
the
not to,
end.
in my mind, the argument to the Conservation Committee would be it's less pervious surfaces, less houses, less of everything, because there's only 5 instead of what could be 7.
Right,
That's, I think, the big picture argument, correct?
yes,
And then just for my mind, when you look at the conservation plan, 7 lots, and again, it's still preliminary, who knows where they'll actually end up, but as it's presented here, the community land, so to speak, I can't remember the term you used, but
open space.
the open space, that's all the area closest to the Maidfoot River area,
Yeah, you usually look at the site and try to find the most sensitive areas.
Right.
And provide your open space there.
and I guess from my standpoint, that's good in that you're not gonna put a home and there's less cars in those sensitive areas. But from a perspective of it's really open space that's available and usable by all the people in development, if it really is just tall reeds and swampland, that's accessible to anybody, does it really meet that? And I don't really know if there's an answer to it, but
We're only allowed to have a certain portion of the open space be considered undevelopable. So
okay.
so it has to be developable land area, that's
Okay,
your
so
open
it's-
space.
So it's legitimately space that someone could
Legitimate, yeah.
walk and do whatever someone wants to do in open space. It's no, that's a swampland and you can't do anything with it anyways. Okay.
Of course, people walk in swamplands
Yeah,
anyway.
that's true too.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, the open space does include the percent required that's developable.
Right.
You take that undevelopable land out.
Okay. And to the extent that permeable surfaces will be used realistically at the early stage, what type of, are we looking at the roadway as a quote pervious or not? Or are we just looking at,
The roadway, the portion that's going to be constructed is probably going to be a paved surface. because they are gonna ask that the town take
Maintain
over it.
right.
But
The sidewalks, I assume,
we
on
do
the
have
side?
one sidewalk on the side, because Serenity Drive already has a
Right.
sidewalk, so it makes sense to extend it through. So we are matching that and putting in the street trees. But you really get into your pervious, other than the fact that the planning board seems to be supportive of shortening the roadway, which by default reduces your impervious surface. Other pervious surfaces that we might end up with are like pervious driveways,
Right.
things like that. But that really comes into effect when you get each of the lots approved when they
Sure.
pull a building permit. And how we've controlled that for the last few subdivisions that my office has worked on is to put a maximum impervious area per lot, right on the subdivision plan. So when they go to pull their building permit, Jack and Warren can pull that up, see what their impervious area is that they're allowed, and then go from there.
And does the footprint of the house count toward that calculation?
Yes.
I assume so, right?
Yes.
Right. Okay. And you also indicated earlier that in addition to potentially shortening the road to the cul-de-sac, you'd also make it a little narrower as well, is that
We
correct?
are asking for a waiver from the town's roadway width, so that we're gonna meet fire code, obviously, but we are asking that it not be the full 26 feet wide.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions. The land on lots 6A, 68A and 68B right now is essentially, it's all thick brush and bushes that lead into the wetland area. And looking at sheet 3, which is where your five-home conventional development, to what extent is clearing of the land going to take place, particularly near the wetland 50-foot perimeter area? 'Cause
I'm
I think
sorry,
those-
I didn't hear your question.
What is it planned right now to remove all the brush and bushes and shrubbery near the wetland perimeter area on the lots? Because I know those lots go into the wetland perimeter area a little bit on the one side.
So we're required by state law to maintain a 50-foot perimeter wetland from the wetland edge. The DEM, as part of their review, one of the stipulations of their approval is going to be that we install 4x4 posts that stick 2 feet above grade along that entire edge. That way people can't mow a little bit farther every single year. And that keeps a buffer to that wetland and helps protect it.
So you'll leave the current foliage that's in place in those areas?
That's what
You won't remove
they'll
it.
ask, that we leave it and let it grow naturally.
Okay.
There was a recommendation from the TRC that have the wetlands area remeasured. Is that out of date or in date, or? can you tell me?
So the delineated wetland edge, I don't know that it was ever verified. As part of the permitting through the state, they'll come out and confirm that the delineated edge is
Okay.
appropriate. If it gets substantially, obviously, that's part of the reason why you do master plan, so everyone gets to see your conceptual idea. As long as we can get the engineering to work, then you go through the preliminary plan step. But that's one of the things that could change during that phase, is when we're in the state permitting. If they say, we think these flags need to be 50 feet this way, that's gonna change that developable land area.
Some of your houses, especially lot 4, the house was right up next to that area.
Yeah, it's not too bad. What ends up being closest to the wetland perimeter, the buffer associated with it, ends up being the drainage system, just because by default it goes downhill, you know, so you get that.
I have another question. This is in relation to regarding stone walls. I noticed on sheet 2, there are 2 long stone walls that are shown on sheet 2, but that are not shown on sheets 3 or 12, but they are shown on sheet 10. And my question is, are the stone walls right now planned to be removed? Sheet 3 and 12 options.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Are the stone walls planned to be removed right now?
We haven't gotten that far, and honestly, the survey that we're using was one that was taken from the previous subdivision that was done. We haven't done our personal survey yet, so I'm not sure if those walls are still there. I assume they are, but they may relocate them. That'll be something we'll show on our subdivision plan.
Okay.
Because I think there might be a stone wall ordinance in this town.
Yes,
Yeah.
there is.
Yeah.
So to the extent that those walls intersect some of the proposed lots, the planning board would probably require them to come up with a plan to relocate the walls and rebuild them in a different location. So.
Right. Okay.
But there would be some duty to preserve what's there.
Okay. Another question I have
No, that's not a wall.
regarding sheet 6 of 12. In the town, and this is relating to the slope of the land. In the town rules and regulations regarding the subdivision and development of land, in section 618, it says that no earth, gravel, or sand slope shall exceed a 3 horizontal to 1 vertical ratio without the use of cribbing, a retaining wall, or similar structure. And on sheet 6 of 12, it indicates that there are slopes on pretty much all the lots that exceed the 3 to 1 vertical ratio. So is there cribbing, retaining walls, and similar structures planned for these lots that are not shown in the drawings?
So usually the intent behind that regulation is when you're doing proposed slopes that exceed a 3 to 1, because you end up getting erosion that happens, and then the grass or whatever you're planting doesn't come through as well. So you put in mats or something that keeps the soil in place while the plantings are grown. The existing slopes on site are obviously established, so I don't know if we'll need to change that, but if we do a grading plan that proposes to change that, we don't normally propose slopes that are that steep, except when you're in your drainage basin area, right, the side slopes of your drainage basin. And in that case, we would use those protections.
All right.
Correct, there's a 3% and 8% slope on that. A 3 and 1 slope is a 30% slope? I didn't see that. Maybe there's a confusion. 3% slope versus 3 and 1?
It says on the sheet here, it says, is that the sheet 3?
Sheet 6, we have the steeper areas are 5% and 8%. I don't have a 3%.
I have a 3 and 1. Well,
There's no 3 to 1 on site right now.
I know.
Maybe when you get in the wetland down near the stream bank, but no.
I didn't see a 3 and 1 on your plan.
I think it's an 8, and it looks like a 3 maybe.
It says slopes 1% to 5%.
Yeah, 1% to 5%.
I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah. So
1%.
that means they're,
Does that mean 1 degree to 5 degrees?
yeah, so it's, 5% is 1 foot, 1 vertical foot in 20 feet.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, maybe I can help out. The handicap ramp slope is 8%. 1 in 12 is 8% slope. So it's relatively flat.
Unless you're in a wheelchair, then it's
That's for a wheelchair ramp, 1 in 12.
Okay?
Are there going to be any plantings for horticultural embellishments that are part of the whole development rather than house per house?
We're not going to do any specific improvements and details for landscaping house per house. It'll be street trees, because that's what the town has in their subdivision regulations. And then there'll be, grasses and whatever we need for the drainage system to meet the codes based on whatever drainage system we have. But we're not gonna get into mandating that people have a certain tree in their yard.
Okay, so up to each individual homeowner.
It'll be up to each individual homeowner, yeah.
I just had one other question that came to my mind when I was looking at the design here. I know that this road here, the slope of it goes down to where the cul-de-sac's gonna be. And the cross-section view of the road shows that it has a bit of a curvature on it so that the water will flow to the sides. And then it'll flow down to the cul-de-sac. And at the center end of the cul-de-sac, I think there's a manhole opening there, I guess where the water's gonna flow down to. So you're gonna have a lot of water coming down.
So
Both
it's
sides.
important to note that the master plan subdivision checklist requires that we put in a roadway cross-section, but no engineering has been done. So that is going to change. We just have to get that check mark done. They also make us show a sewer profile, which we can't really engineer until we start doing the project. Those are premature checklist requirements that we have to do, or it doesn't get accepted complete. But I understand what you're saying, and there will be catch basins in the curb line as we go down.
Okay.
And then it'll be piped and run into the drainage. That's what I'm picturing, envisioning for this project. But like I said, we haven't really done the design yet. We're just required by code to put that in, and I've been trying to make one that just works for every project, but
Let me
every
ask you a
project's
question.
different.
You're coming with a very preliminary plan here.
It is.
Do you come back later on with a more final plan for approval to this committee, or is this our chance to put our input into it?
So I'll defer to the solicitor. We're not in the watershed protection district, so we normally wouldn't come before you at all.
Okay, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, that's my question. What is the issue today?
Well, and I can address that, and Mr. Jackson can pipe in as well. There was a issue raised at the planning board meeting by an abutter to the property who, in reading the subdivision regulations, suggested that even for a subdivision which did not include any land in Zone 1 or Zone 2 of the Watershed Protection District, that there still had to be a referral at master plan stage to the Conservation Commission. And I think you could read the regulation broad enough to require that, and I think the applicant, to avoid there being an issue on appeal down the road, suggested that the matter be continued so it could at least come to the board for your review and comment. So that's really the reason why we're here, because normally you don't see these sorts of subdivisions or see them at this particular stage where there isn't any real drainage or engineering for you to take a look at.
J. Russell Jackson for the applicant. I concur with the solicitor's comments at the last planning board meeting. The issue was raised as to whether or not Ron Wolanski, as the planner, had satisfied the requirements of the ordinance by soliciting comment from various departments, including the Conservation Commission. So in an abundance of caution, we certainly agreed that Ron should solicit comment, because that's what the ordinance says, and we were agreeable to be before you this evening as well to answer any questions, again, to extinguish any sort of loose end or any opportunity for the objector to take an appeal because we didn't satisfy procedural requirements in the subdivision regulations at master plan level. So that's why we're here this evening, and that's why Lynn's carried the water, because she can answer all the questions on the on the layout as opposed to
Do we
me.
need
So
approval of any sort? Are we supposed to vote on this? As we're-
You would, I think, provide, vote on any recommendations that the board might have. So, once again, whether it's regarding a conventional versus conservation plan, a 5-lot versus a 7, the proposed shortening of the road, anything that you think might be appropriate to your purview.
Does anybody else have any other comments or questions?
I'm not sure if this is part of, but I was asking him about, with the plowing, when they go in and plow the snow, if they're are you gonna decrease the road or make it shorter? You said 26 inches, or is that gonna be an issue, right?
I mean,
When
it should,
when they plow snow or something, is that gonna?
it shouldn't be. The Department of Public Works, we have curbs on the side. It's like Cape Cod berms, and they're pretty good at plowing the roadways, I don't think it's gonna be an issue. I'm sure the neighbors that live in that area will call if they have a problem.
So Lynn, I have some comments and some questions as the planning board's representative sitting here. To me, less is more. You know, I'm more inclined towards the 5-lot conventional versus 7. In the 5-lot conventional, you have a shorter roadway. Its width is decreased by 6 feet, 26.
20 foot wide, clear, right. and
Right,
then the
20
curve.
versus 26. So what I wish we had was a percentage of pervious to impervious areas, looking at looking at the alternatives.
Oh,
5-lot conventional, 7-lot conventional, 7-lot conservation. I think it would be really helpful to be able to say, what's our percentage of pervious to impervious in those?
mhm.
I know you're outside certain sensitive watershed areas, but having lived on Paradise Avenue and having the Maidford Brook run directly behind my house, it's not pleasant when there's a heavy rain. Tremendous amount of stormwater runoff. I think you're going to have tremendous stormwater runoff on this property given the slopes into the river. We're going to be commenting on, the full impact build out in the
Yeah.
town of Middletown. And my issues are water quality and stormwater runoff. And looking at this, it just really resonates with me in terms of those issues and what plan is going to provide the most protection for that river, which I know is seasonal, but, it floods. You get down at the end of Paradise Avenue by Surfer's End, it's flooded after every heavy rain. You can't swim. Third Beach is closed. Surfer's End is polluted. It's getting worse and worse. I'm really, really sensitive about those things. I think you mentioned municipal water and town and sewer. To me, those are, if we have the ability to connect to sewer and to town water on any new subdivision developments, it should be done. I think doing anything less is becoming irresponsible. It's just my opinion.
Mhm.
But trying to think what are some of my other questions. I think a lot of good points were brought up here, but I've stated how I feel about 5 versus 7, and the shorter roadway to me and 6 feet more narrow to me is less pervious area, which I'm in favor of. Is trying to get maximum water infiltrated back into the soil is a good thing.
So right now, speaking to this, the Compton View neighborhood currently has has sewer and water, correct? And you said gas as well, actually? Do you know?
The Compton
Compton View neighborhood? Did you
yes,
know?
I think they do.
Okay.
I know it exists, yes, I believe they
right.
do, yep.
Okay,
We're bringing sewer in, that's
Right.
that's not,
okay, just not,
that's not a
But-
maybe.
but not
The-
well water.
The
But not-
one they're looking at right now was the municipal water.
Right,
Until recently, we hadn't had a meeting with Department of Public Utilities to make sure they were gonna support that proposal and
Right.
what they were gonna have them do. And then we just had to give them an idea of the cost. It's very likely that they're gonna be bringing in the water.
Mhm.
And when they bring in the water, they're also bringing in a hydrant. So there's a lot of benefits to it.
Mhm.
It is pretty expensive. It adds like over $150,000 to the project, though. It's a big,
Bringing in the water,
yeah,
right.
it's a big investment because you have to repave the road. That's just adding water to the project and repaving the end of Serenity Drive that's currently already paved.
Right.
That's not our road or any, because they have to do that regardless.
Right.
But based on your experience in front of the planning board, there's been a lot of concern expressed about private wells, and in this area, people's And in all areas of Middletown, east of like Aquidneck Avenue, people's wells periodically running dry or pressure going down, so.
It's
It's an
something they're
issue.
taking very seriously
Yeah.
because they're familiar with the planning board opinion on water, municipal water versus wells. So I know they're taking it very seriously.
Any other questions? Suppose we have to send a recommendation letter to town planner. So would the group be in favor of the conventional 5-unit plan as a recommendation?
I would favor the five plan.
Okay. And would be in favor of municipal water, gas and sewer? Okay. And in favor of the narrow access road? Okay.
And a shorter cul-de-sac as well,
Okay.
correct?
Yes.
Does the
Utilizing the
cul-de-sac have to be
Using the public
paved?
right of way to get
Yes.
necessary frontage.
Any other recommendations that I should put in?
Mr. Chair, did you say sewer and water? Gas, sewer, and water?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, great. Just want to confirm. Thank you.
Those are the 3 suggestions I think that we can provide. They said that no matter what plan it's gonna be, there's gonna be a treatment and a retention pond placed regardless of what plan's put in. Did I hear you correctly?
The regulations will require both detention and water quality
It
treatment.
wasn't on one of the plans, but it was on some of the other ones.
Is there any dimensions from the boundary that detention has to be placed? I mean, obviously, as shown here, the goal is to stick it in the farthest corner away from people's homes as humanly possible. But again, that's putting it right up against the buffer zone, which it's a buffer, so I guess it's serving its purpose. But is there anything that prohibits it from being located elsewhere? I can't imagine so, but you're just taking up more of the good space with something you can't use. So you generally is always going to shove it way in the back where it's out of sight and out of mind, outside the buffer area, right? Yeah, that's what, okay.
Do you want to address that?
So there's a few drivers in the location of the drainage feature. Obviously, one of them is to put it at the most down gradient point of the project, reasonably down gradient point of the project. The DEM will make sure we're 10 feet off that buffer because they don't want us going in there to do the construction. So we'll be off of that. We're supposed to provide separation from the homes for any basin that might infiltrate. And then the other thing that you have to take into account is that when you're working on catch basins, it's not surface runoff that you're dealing with now. Your pipe is probably 4 feet below grade before it leaves the road.
Right.
So our drainage basin has to capture that, and you have to have a decent slope on it, or you'll get really large pipes to take that capacity. So all those factors come together. But you're right, you do try to put it so that it increases the value of the project.
Okay.
There's an easement over it for maintenance, so I know back in the 80s and early 90s, projects tended to forget their drainage systems, but that's not really gonna happen anymore. And if the town does find that it is happening, there's a lot of things in place where they can come back, even if they have to go in and maintain it themselves and back charge people. Those things are in place for them now.
Is there different sizing based upon the number of houses in your development as far as the catch basin has to be?
Absolutely, we have to design that's the engineering part. And we develop the engineering hydraulic models of the drainage basins, and we have to meet the peak runoffs before it leaves the site so it doesn't increase from the project under existing conditions. And then the capacity of those pipes, it'll maybe start out as a 12-inch, and by the time you get to the end of the road, you're looking at a 24-inch diameter pipe.
Any other recommendations from the group that we should put in our brief letter? So with those 4 points, do we have a motion to approve those 4 points?
So moved.
I second.
All in favor?
Mhm.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? solves this problem tonight. I have one further question of the group, and that's, I put a paper copy of the plans rather than a computerized mailed-to copy of the plans in the mailboxes over there. Was that helpful to anybody? Did you like having a paper copy in your hands?
Yeah.
So that's, you should continue
Yes.
that. Okay. And I have to apologize, this month was my first month of doing this, and I got all the information at odd times, so you got multiple emails from me. I tried not to do that, but
No worries.
it happened last month.
So is there a
Mr.
mail-
Chair.
Is there a mailbox over there with our name on it? Is that-
No, it's a committee mailbox. It's at by the clerk's office down there.
Oh, okay. I printed,
One question.
like what you emailed us, I printed it, but,
That's fine, but there was a whole big printed one everybody got,
oh,
that I made available.
all right.
Warren?
So if we could, those are full-size sheets, they're 24 by 36 inch, just the size of those sheets. Would you prefer 11 by 17s, which is
I like that,
which
yeah,
is
that's better.
this size
Yeah.
right here? A little
Yeah,
bit,
that's better, yeah.
okay,
Which is
Yeah,
better
that's
for
good
the
enough.
environment.
Yeah, that's perfect.
11 by 17,
The smaller
Yeah.
ones.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's easier to handle, I think, because this you're kind of going back and forth.
yes, exactly. So next time, 7 sets, 11 by 17,
Yeah, perfect.
6, 1, maybe 8 sets.
Any other
Yep.
issues or concerns?
Motion adjourned?
Okay, second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We're adjourned. I guess we'll do this again now. At 6:18.
Nicely done, Jim.
Done.
Yeah.